In my training, I train to prepare for the worst. So, no matter what the situation is, I prepare for the worst. So, I had to be willing, if I'm going to engage, I had to be willing to take it to the furthest extent if necessary. So, if I'm engaging in an argument with somebody because the person's bullying me for whatever reason, and it's a stranger that I don't know, then I prepare. Hey, this person might have a gun. So the other day, you know, it was almost like a road rage situation, but it was on a bicycle where I'm riding my bike, and then I pass this guy up, and all of a sudden he gets all pissed off. He starts swearing at me. I keep going, and I end up hitting a red light, and then the guy starts catching up to me. He still keeps swearing at me, to the point where it got me upset, and I didn't like the fact of him keep pressing forward, to keep pressing forward with this disrespect. I ended up, basically verbally defending myself, standing up for myself, and it could have escalated. But every time I engage in anything when it comes to a verbal confrontation or possibly a physical confrontation, I assume that this person might be armed. And with that assumption, it doesn't mean that I'm going to back off. It just means that I'll be better prepared. Meaning that if it needs to be taken to a gunfight, then I have to be able and capable of taking it to that level if necessary. So meaning to meet that person at whatever level of escalation that they wish to bring it to, that I can meet them at that level to keep it a fair fight. So meaning I don't ever go into a situation where I assume that, they're not armed. I'd rather assume that they are armed and be prepared for that. So then if they end up drawing their weapon, that I'll be able to draw mine and then make it a fair fight. That's the way that I go into it, no matter what situation it is. The absolute worst scenario would be just basically like a cold-blooded killer, like a cold-blooded murderer who just goes into a movie theater, grocery store, department store, and just starts shooting and killing people for the pure pleasure of it. Not even having a reason, but just killing people because they're just angry at the world and they just feel like killing people. That is something that I always prepared for, to be able to fight back, to defend myself and to protect my family and loved ones during those situations. Other situations is where, people will disrespect you, bully you. Usually I let things slide the first time around, but when they keep pressing forward, I tend to want to stand up for myself verbally to not let the person bully me. And even if the bully does have a gun, then I gotta be ready to meet them at that level. But if I don't have a gun, and that person does have a gun, then they have the upper hand. And a lot of times you just gotta back off of that situation. Other times you gotta back off is during a situation of authority. For example, when you're dealing with the police. The police might be a bully, and he might be unlawfully arresting you. He might be violating your rights. He might be swearing at you. He might be disrespecting you. But the smart thing to do in most cases is not to fight back physically. If you are armed, not to draw your weapon because that gives them justification to kill you. And even unarmed, it's not a good idea to fight back, because basically you could never win. Because even if they are unlawfully arresting you, the law states that you still gotta comply and allow them to arrest you, and to basically defend yourself in court to prove that it was an unlawful arrest. But if you fight back physically, chances are it could escalate, to your death. And even if you do successfully defend yourself against a police officer, and by hurting the police officer, there's going to be other police officers after you that will eventually get you and take you out. So basically rebelling against the authority in that manner is not an intelligent thing to do. There's pretty much no way you could win when it comes to a physical resistance. Even verbally to resist is not a good idea. Because when you verbally resist a police officer by yelling at them, screaming at them, swearing at them, it's just going to encourage the situation to be escalated to the point where they could be justified in using force to make you surrender or submit. And they could even end up using deadly force to make you surrender or submit. In those situations, it's best to just stay silent, go through the process of getting arrested, and fighting back with your lawyer in the courts. But when you're dealing with situations where it's not involving the police, where there's just somebody on the streets who's trying to hurt you, or he's physically abusing you, he's trying to rob you, you could fight back, you could defend yourself. You don't need to surrender and submit to these individuals, even if they do have guns. You can fight back. You just have to be smart, because if the person has a gun and you don't have a gun, then it's probably a good idea to back off, even if they are in the wrong. But if they got a gun and you got a gun, then that gives you the ability to fight back and defend yourself and stand up for yourself if you feel that's necessary. So that's how I like to approach every situation. I like to approach every single situation as if the person is armed. And the only way that I will assume or know that they are not armed is pretty much through like a physical search of the individual, or at least a very reliant visual search of the individual. So meaning if the person has no shirt on and he's just wearing shorts, and you could look at his shorts and you could clearly see that there's no gun, you could clearly see that there's no gun in his pocket, then you could know, okay, this person's not armed, and I can handle the situation accordingly based on that information of knowing that the person is not armed. But if the person has baggy clothes on, he has jackets, and he has, looks like there's something in his pocket, then you gotta be prepared, because you don't know what's in the pocket. You don't know if he's got a gun, you don't know if he's got a knife, you don't know if he's got mace, you don't know what he's gonna come out with coming from that pocket. So that's how I like to handle the situation for survival purposes. To me, it's never a game out there. It's life or death. You make a mistake with the police, they can shoot and kill you. When somebody's trying to rob you at gunpoint, they're threatening your life. an argument that starts off on the streets could turn deadly in a split second. You know, there's also another article that I read about 2 weeks ago, talking about a road rage incident that I want to bring up as well, to kind of highlight, um, the topic of this video and the way that I see things. The article is basically saying that there was a road rage situation. One person was driving, and he had, I believe, his daughter in the back, maybe like 6 years old, 7-year-old daughter in the back seat, and he's driving. He gets cut off by somebody, and then he gets upset, and he starts responding by swearing and putting up nonverbal gestures of disrespect. And the person that cut him off ended up getting angry, and then the person ended up shooting at the vehicle of the person of whom he cut off, and they ended up striking and killing the daughter in the rear seat. The murderer ends up leaving the scene, but there were witnesses that saw what happened, and then they were able to identify the vehicle and forward that information to the police. The police ended up catching up to the vehicle, and then the person ended up admitting that he did shoot and kill, the daughter in the back seat. The person was apprehended, but the daughter is still dead. And how could have this situation been prevented? Well, the person that got cut off, obviously, it's not his fault that he got cut off. It was that person that was driving. It was his fault. He was at fault, for cutting the person off. But his response to it, his reaction, could have been different. If he would have known, or if he would have assumed that if I react in a negative way, that this person will shoot at my vehicle and potentially kill my daughter, then he might have refrained himself from responding in a negative way. He could have just basically let the person go and just not make a big deal about it. But because he probably assumed that nothing would happen, he ended up, responding in a very negative way to escalate the situation further. Now, I'm not saying that he's wrong for acting in a negative way, but what I'm saying, it would have been more intelligent for him to be mentally prepared for such a situation by saying, if this person gets angry, then he might have a gun, he might shoot at us. And not only am I jeopardizing my own life, but I'm also jeopardizing the life of my daughter. So because my daughter is with me, I will refrain from reacting in a negative way, so that I do not jeopardize and put her life at risk. So he could have been like, he could have handled the situation better by not reacting negatively. If it was a different scenario where his daughter was not in the car and it was just him, and say he has a gun himself, he's armed, then he could have been like, what? I got my gun. This person did me wrong. I'm going to react. If he reacts back and tries to escalate it, then I'll be prepared for that. I'm willing to put my life on the line to stand up for myself. If he kills me, so be it. If I kill him, so be it. Even if I kill him, he's still in the wrong because he's the one who chose to escalate it to deadly force, and I'm just defending myself. In that situation, that could have been fine. If the daughter was not in the car and the car got shot at and then nobody dies, but the guy just missed, then it just becomes a very deadly encounter that did not result in any death, but it was a close call, a deadly encounter, basically exchanging of gunfire, but with no deaths. So basically what I'm saying is just basically a martial artist should be mentally prepared for these situations. If you are a martial artist that does not carry a gun around with you, then you have to accept and know that there are people out there that do have guns that will always have an advantage over you. And you will need to submit and surrender to these individuals, because no matter how much martial arts training that you have, they have the upper hand over you. And a lot of times you will need to submit and surrender. But if you are a martial artist that carries a gun with you, then you could handle a situation how it needs to be handled. You know, if you're walking down the street and then you see somebody raping a woman and then you're armed, then you could handle that situation. Because if the rapist has a gun, then you could handle the situation accordingly because you have your own gun. But if you don't have a gun and you witness a rapist raping a woman, do not assume that the rapist doesn't have a gun. And then try to be the savior, and then next thing you know, you get shot and killed. Because you did not plan properly. You were not being intelligent with your assessment of the situation. So, I'm sharing my ideas and my philosophy on it because I feel that it's very important for people to really know the difference is between preparing for street survival opposed to just practicing martial arts for entertainment, you know, or for competitive reasons. Out there in the streets is completely different, you know, and you need to put the law into consideration. You gotta know when you're justified to defend yourself and when you're not to, when you're not allowed to. And you gotta know when to hold back your anger and when to basically stand up for yourself if necessary. And these decisions, you know, have to be well thought out before the actual situation, because when the actual situation occurs, you may be overtaken by so much emotion that you're not going to be making the best decision for that moment. And that mistake could cost you your life, or it could cost you your freedom. You might be put in jail for the rest of your life because of a poor decision that you've made. You know, so these are some things that every martial artist must consider.